Hello, everybody. You may not know me. I'm John Lipsky. I'm the vice chair of the Bretton Woods Committee, and I have the great honor of introducing someone who definitely doesn't need an introduction here, Kristalina Georgieva, the distinguished managing director of the International Monetary Fund. We're so happy that you're here with us today, and on this auspicious annual meeting, the 80th anniversary of the Bretton Woods institutions. And when you get to 80, apparently, I'm heard that sometimes they worry about vitality. But it seems to me that in the case of the Bretton Woods institution, hopefully, we're on our way to even new heights. So thanks again, and we'll have a little time for a conversation. Thanks for joining us. Now, in last month's annual report, you noted a mixed picture economy and highlighted a troubled medium-term growth outlook. And you referred to this in your wonderful curtain raiser speech of last week. Want to give us a little hint of what we're going to hear tomorrow at the unveiling of the full World Economic Outlook?
Well, first, many thanks to the Bretton Woods Committee. You have been such a fantastic friend of the institutions. I don't think that we can celebrate being 80 without thanking you. So,
We'll file this under the flattery will get you somewhere department.
Well, I think for us in this room, following the developments in the world economy has been a real roller coaster. Just go back a year, and we were very worried at that time that to stop the inflation wave and reverse it would mean pushing the economy into recession. So here is the good news, and you would hear more about it tomorrow. We got inflation down in almost all economies. Either now it is to target or is approaching target. And labor markets remain strong. The world economy is performing reasonably well. You would get the numbers tomorrow, but above 3%, given what we have been doing, is something that we all have to admit gives an opportunity to breathe a sign of relief. But, as I said in my curtain raiser, you're not going to hear much of popping up champagne during this week, in the next days. And it is for three reasons. The first one is that even if inflation is slowing down, with very few exceptions, central banks are now either already cutting or preparing to cut interest rates. The pain we all feel because prices have gone up is here to stay. And higher level of prices makes many people around the world quite angry. Two, we are faced with this unforgiving combination of slow growth and high debt. Yes, we inflated part of the debt when inflation was high, but if you looked at our analysis on the debt situation, getting to 100% debt to GDP, not a pretty picture, and bringing debt levels down is going to be very, very difficult for two reasons. One, because there is pressure to invest in the transformation that economies are aspiring for, the green transition, the digital transformation. How do you decide how much and where to invest? And two, the appetite for prudent fiscal policy has disappeared. Even traditionally very conservative, fiscally prudent parties are now accustomed to borrow to spend. And it's hard to see how we are going to make the necessary steps. Our message on the fiscal front is it is urgent to act because otherwise you're going to be suffocated by this burden of debt. But as you act, you have to do it gradually. It's actually a complicated message. I see Jayla here. We spent some time thinking how to tell people it is urgent, but don't rush. You know, gradual transition is what you need to do. And the third reason is the one that we all are witnessing painfully developing as a negative factor for growth: fragmentation in the world economy. What we have seen in the last 18 months is very profound. 4,000 industrial policy measures taken in the world, and for the first time, the majority of these measures, 60%, come from advanced economies. True, there are important reasons why security of supplies, national security considerations, the need for speed for the green transition is pressing governments to look into industrial policy seriously and apply it. But when we digested the 4,000 measures, we concluded that some 2/3 of them are trade distorting, and trade for the first time is not the engine of growth, but it is kind of follower of growth. Trade is growing slightly slower than global growth. So this is the environment within which we meet. So my take is that policymakers here will have that, oh, thank God, inflation is down reaction. But at the same time, I genuinely hope we would be able to scare them enough that they would go home and they would act decisively on the fiscal front. How is that for projection?
Let's hope they're listening. It has been quite remarkable to hear politicians of all stripes promoting new measures, spending measures, industrial policy measures, without thinking about what it's doing to debt, to deficits, and to trade. But now this sounds like an environment that's not necessarily wonderful for developing and emerging economies who have come away from the last 2 rounds of crisis with serious debt issues, either actual or prospective. Are we making any progress in terms of the funds being able to support these economies and to deal with the issue of debt restructuring?
Well, let me first pay tribute to the emerging markets that over the last decades, especially since the global financial crisis, have built stronger policies and institutions. Some of them performed quite well under the shocks that we have been hit in the last years. So when we look at emerging markets and developing economies, what we see there is twofold. We have countries with strong fundamentals, and they are withstanding these pressures better. And we have countries with weaker fundamentals or with really weak economies that are substantially burdened. I mean, when I think of countries with weaker fundamentals among emerging markets, for reasons of their own or because of exogenous shocks or combination of two, I think of the people of Pakistan, I think of the people of Egypt, I think of the people of Sri Lanka, I think of the people of Ecuador, I think of the people of Argentina, where there is more that needs to be done. And then low-income countries. And there the picture is really, for quite a number of them, quite severe. They're way below their pre-pandemic growth trends. They have seen poverty up in quite a number of them, hunger up. And of course, debt levels are, for some of these countries, are very difficult to bear. So what do we do? What we do, I would put in 3 buckets. The first bucket is to get support for countries that have dire debt vulnerabilities and where that is not sustainable. For these countries, we engage with their creditors to help them restructure their debt. You have heard a lot about the common framework. Yes, it is not perfect, but actually the common framework, supported by the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable that we set together with the World Bank and the Indian G20 presidency, it is delivering faster and better outcomes for countries. I look at the story with Chad, 11 months to get to meaningful debt restructuring. Now we have Ethiopia, higher debt level, only 3 months to get to an outcome. And actually, I was just with the delegation of Ethiopia. And I can tell you that it gives me so much happiness, joy, to see a country decisively moving into bringing its economy on sound footing. So for these countries where debt is not sustainable, debt restructuring is the way to go. Secondly, we have quite a number of countries where debt is high, but it is not a solvency issue. It is a liquidity problem. And I want to praise Jayla Pazar-Bashioglu and her team. They have worked on a 3-pronged approach for liquidity-constrained countries where we systematically work on getting more domestic resource mobilization, getting countries to do better in raising revenues and improving the quality of their spending, getting them more international support. So we collectively, in a coordinated manner, the World Bank, the other development banks, the IMF, we inject liquidity in these countries in a synchronized manner, so it makes a difference. And of course, working with them to make the economies more attractive for private investments. So in that category where liquidity is a problem, we have to systematically address it. And then, of course, we come with that second leg of the liquidity support. We finance countries. We are now at almost $400 billion in lending since the start of the pandemic. When you add to this the injection of special drawing rights, this is $1 trillion liquidity and reserves injected in the world economy. We have been very successful these last weeks to get our membership to translate our own financial strength. Can I do a commercial here?
Please do.
Look, for a long time, long time, the IMF had a target for precautionary balances. This is what buffers us. So we tell countries, build your buffers, there may be worse times to come. But we wouldn't reach our own target until April this year. So for the first time, we reached and exceeded our target for precautionary balances. That's my commercial.
Yes.
What we now do is we turn to the membership and we said, can we move some of this strength into easing the pressure on our members? So we got unanimous decision of our membership to do 2 things: reduce charges and surcharges by 36%, so it's cheaper for countries to service debt to the IMF, and direct some of our income to increase our concessional lending capacity, our subsidy account for the PRGT. So we can do almost 3 times as much for countries than we did before the pandemic. So we, on our side, we recognize that we have to be a reliable source of financing for countries in this very difficult moment in time. You will see Ajay later. I cannot praise enough the World Bank for being our partner for these countries.
This is great. Would you
And we changed our own policies on our participation in debt restructuring to make us more agile, more reliable.
Great. Sticking with that for a minute. So is more progress to come through the sovereign debt roundtable?
Yes, I do expect more progress. So far, what we have done is the first thing we have done is we brought everybody around the table, the traditional lenders, the non-traditional lenders, China, India, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and then the private sector, the key private sector financiers, and the countries, the borrowing countries, the debtor countries themselves. So everybody's around the table. And then we identified the problems that are on the way of efficient and effective debt restructuring. Compatibility of treatment, creating trust so people are able to more quickly reach conclusions. And we identified a list of problems to be solved, and we are going check through this list. This time around, there would be a lot of discussion around on this question of liquidity versus solvency. Because if a liquidity problem is not addressed, it can, and most likely it will, turn into a solvency problem. And I expect to get one more step forward on private sector creditors and public sector creditors cooperating in the cases when debt restructuring is a necessity.
Great. Do you want to say a word about the RST or progress?
I do, indeed.
The right
RST.
word.
How many of you know what is RST? We love acronyms in this place. How many of you don't know? Actually, that is the more important question. How many of you have no idea what he's talking about, John is talking about? Okay, so it is the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, the first ever long-term concessional financing instrument of the IMF. We are providing funding at 20 years maturity, 10 and a half years grace, concessional terms to help countries create fiscal space primarily for the green transition, primarily for climate mitigation and adaptation, can be also used for pandemic preparedness. When we set our eyes to create it, it was just about 2 years ago. We set a target of $40 billion, and the way we generated this $40 billion was to turn to countries with strong reserves and say, hey, we gave you special drawing rights. You don't really need them. Lend it back to us. We guarantee their reserve status, but we would use it to help our members. And we actually do this for RST, and we do it for poverty reduction growth. We didn't know at that time, would there be anybody demanding this? Now where we are is we have 20 programs. So in 2 years, 20 programs. We have a queue of another 30 countries. Our target was 40 billion. We now have already mobilized $48 billion. And those who have taken advantage of RST first, like Rwanda, are saying, when can we knock on the door for our second RST? So you would see me to be on a fundraising mission because demand is so strong, because when we create fiscal space, working together with the World Bank and the other development banks, we can help countries mobilize on scale financing for their climate objectives. So, very good story. One that says that money should not be let idle. And actually, if I have one message to everybody in these days when growth is slow, debt is high, do not let money be lazy.
Very good. I'm glad I asked. But now, let's continue down this climate road. That's a challenge for everybody. And there's been a lot of discussion about what should the role of the fund be? Is it macro-critical? How should the fund be addressing climate issues more broadly?
But the reason the fund has embraced a climate strategy 2 years ago was very simple. We can see the evidence in our members that climate risks are materializing, hurting economic prospects of countries. And on the flip side, accelerating the climate transition is an opportunity to create green jobs and pursue green growth. So when we are so obsessed with a higher trajectory for growth, we cannot abandon our responsibility to the members to help them manage the risks down, improve their chances to capture the opportunities. What we do on the climate front is strictly what the fund is set to do. First, we incorporate climate impacts into our Article 4 consultation. So if a country is a big emitter, we look into what policies are appropriate to bring emission intensity down, phase out harmful subsidies. At their high, they reach 1.2 trillion. Look at ways in which you can incentivize the economy to transform, and especially for vulnerable, climate-vulnerable countries, what can they do to have more resilient economy, more resilient agriculture, more resilient approach to how they manage their finances. Two, we look at climate-related financial stability risks. When we do FSAPs, financial sector assessment programs, we look at the vulnerabilities that come because a bank is too exposed to investment in real estate in a place that gets hit and hammered by hurricanes. You know, it is bread and butter role for the fund. Three, data. We help countries to build data sets that help them to be more effective in pursuing their broad growth objectives in a more effective manner. And four, we are a financier. As we just spoke, we put money where our mouth is: resilience and sustainability, trust. I know some people have been worried, is the fund meandering in the wilderness? Absolutely not. We do what we are good at: fiscal, monetary policy, and of course, high-quality financing.
Terrific. Now, let's come back in the few minutes remaining and think about an 80-year-old institution looking forward, hopefully with a lot of vision, a lot of wisdom accumulated. When you look forward for the fund and for the Bretton Woods institutions in general, how do you perceive the future, and what are the key challenges?
John, you and I went to the Bretton Woods in New Hampshire with a small group of people. And what we did there was to think exactly about that. Where we are coming from, where we are headed, why. And I drew out of this discussion, as well as out of discussions we have in our team, 3 very important conclusions. Number 1, countries are members of the Bretton Woods institutions not out of charity. They're members out of self-interest, and therefore delivering value to the different groups in our membership is number 1 priority for us. And understanding that the needs of countries change, and what the fund can deliver for them, what we can offer to them, also changes. Stay ahead of this. I mentioned the decisions we have taken this week. Make sure that the membership is, in its diversity, gets value from the fund. And you would see us focusing over the next years on the very big topics. How do you lift up growth prospects? What is a pro-growth fiscal policy? What do we do about the fragmentation in the world? How can we offer countries good analysis on the cost and benefits of their policy decisions, so they make informed decisions? And of course, look at the challenges that individual countries face, be country-specific in our engagement. The second conclusion I drew out of there was that we cannot stay still when the world is changing. We have to be more inclusive. We have to be more legitimate, because we change with the world. On November 1st, we are going to welcome a new sub-Saharan African chair at our board of directors. Why? Because we have to give more voice to an underrepresented region. We have to look into the way the fund membership feels that we are reflecting the changes in the world, and help this process, help it in a meaningful way. Connect to the, we are in a world that is now more multipolar. We talked before we came here. We are now engaging more systematically with parts of the world that are building their own integrity, like the ASEAN countries, very dynamic region, like the Gulf countries. They have their own structures. And the third conclusion I drew is that there is one mission that there is no other institution to pursue, and it is a global financial system that is resilient, capable to deliver benefits, a global financial safety net that is resilient, capable of delivering benefits. So how we work in building further strength in the global financial safety net, how we work with the global financial arrangements, regional financial arrangements in a more systematic manner. So because if we don't do it, if we are not, we are the guardian of the global financial system. We were created for this purpose. Be bold, be brave, be creative, do it for the world economy. And now I'm going to say something. Don't think of us being old and tired. We are young and dynamic. And we will rock you.
Folks, we can't top that. So I think that's a great place to stop. Managing Director, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your message. And in a final advertisement, in a week or week after a former economic counselor has been awarded the Nobel Prize,
yes,
I think we can hope that the fund remains a fount of intellectual creativity and knowledge.
Thank you. Hooray for Simon Johnson. Yes,
indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.